Welcome to Female Fluence. We are a place of women empowering women. This is a safe environment where females are not judged nor afraid to flourish. My goal is to help you live an energized life of balance, whether as a mom, a wife, or in your profession. It is time to have self-worth and self-compassion. Live in the present moment and surround yourself with only healthy connections. So join me, Promash Shua, a woman empowerment life coach, an educator, and a mother of three, to help take you on a journey of true identity and inspiration. Despite its importance, parenting doesn't have a manual. Each child has a unique needs, making it a perpetual balance act from the moment we become parents. Yet, amidst this complexity, a concerning trend is emerging. Some parents seem to relinquish their roles, allowing their children to dictate the terms. How did this happen? Why have some of us stopped actively parenting, allowing our children to take the reign? In today's discussion, we are joined by the esteemed author, Dr. Leonard Sax, who sheds light on this major issue. Dr. Sax argues that the rising levels of obesity, depression, and anxiety among young children can be directly linked to parents abdicating their authority. The consequence is a germination of children with a tenuous grasp on moral values, lacking in discipline, and seeking guidance not from their parents, but from their peers and the internet. It's time to reevaluate our approach to parenting, to reclaim our roles as guides and mentors for our children. Today, we will delve into this critical conversation and explore strategies to empower parents to regain control and positively influence the development of our future. Dr. Sax's academic journey is nothing short of remarkable. At the young age of 19, he attained his bachelor's degree in biology from MIT. Building upon his foundation, he pursued further education, obtaining both a PhD in psychology and an MD. He actively shares his insights with various community groups and schools, serving as a speaker to educate and empower others. Dr. Sax is also a prolific author, having written 4 books aimed at parents, with The Collapse of Parenting emerging as New York Times bestseller, which I have right here. Incredible book. This book actually resonated deeply with me because of its candid exploration of the shifting of the modern parenting. So profound was my connection to this book that I have eagerly shared this book with many of my friends and colleagues. Dr. Sax has been a guest on Today and CNN many times, as well as PBS, Fox News, NPR, BBC, and many other national and international media. His essays have been published in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and many other outlets. I am truly honored to have Dr. Sax as a guest today. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
According to the book that I actually talked about right now, why do you think that parenting has changed for the worse? And why do you think that we're hurting our kids if we are treating them like grown-ups?
Okay, so that's a reference to the subtitle of the book, How We Hurt Our Kids When We Treat Them Like Grown-ups. Non-celebrity authors don't get to choose their titles or their subtitles. That's in the contract. And I didn't like that subtitle. And I really went to bat and went to the mat, to mix metaphors, with the publisher. The subtitle, incidentally, the title that I submitted to the publisher was The Collapse of American Parenting. And the subtitle was Why Most Kids Would Now Be Better Off Raised Outside North America, focusing specifically on contrasts in parenting that I had observed comparing and meeting with parents in England, Scotland, Germany, German-speaking Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand. Not all of those countries are paragons, but I was especially impressed by what I saw in the South Island, New Zealand, and in German-speaking Switzerland. We can get back to that if you're interested. But I didn't I didn't at all like the subtitle, How We Hurt Our Kids When We Treat Them Like Grown-ups. I thought it was terrible. And I really fought with the publisher because, many parents are big fans of Lenora Skenazy. Lenora Skenazy talks about free-range kids. Give your kids liberty. Let them go walk to the grocery store at 10 years of age. Let them take the subway at 10 years of age. Don't hover. Don't helicopter. And I support a lot of that. And I think in many contexts, and we can talk about which contexts are appropriate, but in many contexts, you should treat your kids like grown-ups. You should give them autonomy and agency. I wanted a title more like How We Hurt Our Kids When We Abandon Parental Authority, because the subtitle as it is very ambiguous. In some situations, we should not treat kids like adults, like deciding what's for supper. In deciding what's for supper, parents should make the call. And I have a chapter, you mentioned obesity. I have a chapter exploring what's going on there. In 1971, 4% of American kids were obese. Today, more than 20% of American kids are obese, not merely overweight, but obese. That's a quintupling. Why did that happen? Well, it happened for a number of reasons, not just one reason, but one, which I explore in that chapter, the different reasons. But one of those reasons that certainly plays a part is the fact that 50 years ago, parents chose what's for supper. But now a growing number of parents, they read in the New York Times that good parenting means letting kids decide. And so they think that means letting kids decide what's for supper.
Right.
Well, when you let 10-year-olds decide what's for supper, there are actually a few who will choose broccoli, Brussels sprouts,
There's a lot of DoorDash too, right?
but there are a lot of kids who will choose pizza, French fries, potato chips, and ice cream. So I was speaking to parents on this topic in Chappaqua, New York, an affluent suburb north of New York City. And husband and wife told me how they had made a healthy and nutritious supper for their son and daughter. And son and daughter came home and they said, yuck, we don't want to eat that. Can we just order pizza? So dad got out the Domino's pizza app and the daughter dictated her order and the son dictated his order. They both got a personal pizza with their own preferred toppings. And I asked Dad, why'd you do that? Why didn't you just tell them this is what's for supper? And he said, well, I don't believe in using starvation as a means of discipline. I said, they're not going to starve. Look, 50 years ago, if mom made a healthy and nutritious supper and the kids didn't like it, she didn't run out and buy them a pizza. She would say, this is what's for supper. If you don't like it, you can go to bed hungry. But today, again, many parents think good parenting means letting kids decide. And that is one factor beyond any doubt, which I present the evidence at length in that chapter. One factor driving this explosion in the proportion of young kids who are obese. So that subtitle, How We Hurt Our Kids When We Treat Them Like Adults, again, is ambiguous and in my view, unacceptably ambiguous. We should not treat kids like grown-ups when it comes to choosing what's for supper or choosing whether they're going to have a phone in their bedroom overnight. Mm-hmm. Those are decisions that the parents have to make. But in other domains, I do think we should give kids more autonomy and give them more agency and allow kids to walk around outdoors and hang out with friends outdoors in the real world at 10, 12, 14 years of age within reasonable parameters.
You also stated that it's generally become cool for children and teens to disrespect parents and adults throughout the United States. What do you think is the basis of this culture of disrespect?
Okay, so that is not unique to the United States. And the key essay that I cite was written by a German sociologist, Norbert Elias, in his essay titled Über den Veränderungen in europäischen Verhaltensstandards, meaning regarding the changes in European standards. And he observed that the big trend in Western European culture, and it certainly applies in the United States, beginning after the Second World War, was a derogation of authority and hierarchy. And throughout the West, in Western Europe and in North America, the notion of authority became suspect. People became very suspicious of hierarchy in any form. And there are many factors that drove that, and probably drove that farther in the United States than elsewhere. I've written about Richard Nixon to Bill Clinton. In 1973, President Richard Nixon said, "I am not a crook," but he was. In 1998, Bill Clinton said, "I did not have sex with that woman," but he did. Over 25 years, we had two presidents, one Republican and one Democrat, who did immense damage to the institution of the American presidency. And when I talk to people about this, I say, go back and pull up, you can easily get them on YouTube, some of the old press conferences with President Eisenhower or President John F. Kennedy. And you'll be stunned by the difference in tone. The reporters are deferential. They're almost bowing. Mr. President, if I may, one more question. Mr. President, thank you so much for answering that. It's like another planet, another culture, because it is another culture. It is a culture where the President of the United States was afforded great respect. But I'm not just talking about politics. I'm old enough to remember growing up in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, at the public golf course. If a Roman Catholic priest turned up at the golf course, he would be escorted to the front of the line. He wouldn't have to wait because he was a Catholic priest. And we're talking 50 years ago. Now, more recently, a Catholic priest told me how he got onto an elevator at a hotel, and a mother with a young child clutched her child close to her, because she now sees a Catholic priest as an agent of evil. Right. And there's countless stories of large corporations eliminating jobs, shutting down factories, relocating to jobs to Mexico or to Indonesia, all throughout American culture, whether it's the institution of the presidency, the church, the major employers. All these institutions have done immense damage to themselves, and we can no longer trust them. And there has been a collapse of trust in American culture that many, many people have written about. I cite Robert Putnam at Harvard. There are many others who have documented how, 50 years ago, again, we have poll numbers from Gallup. 50 years ago, most Americans said you could trust other people to be fundamentally good. Now, most Americans say you cannot trust anybody to be fundamentally good. There's been a collapse of trust, and many, many scholars have written about how that tears at the fabric of culture. The problem is that the parent-child relationship is different. Another point I make in my writing specifically about what's changed in the culture that we no longer trust, we no longer respect, we no longer allow for hierarchy, is the collapse of hierarchy. And again, you can write the cultural history of the last 70 years as being a breakdown of hierarchy. Men used to enjoy rights which women did not enjoy. That's no longer the case. White people used to enjoy rights that Black people in many states did not enjoy. That's no longer the case. And that's a good thing.
Right.
Men and women should have equal rights.
Exactly.
Black and white people should have equal rights. There has been this feeling that, any gradation of power, any power relationship is illegitimate. We have to abolish all those hierarchies. Equality for everybody.
Right.
Why not? Well, but not for kids. Because the parent-child relationship is different from any other human relationship. Because it is the role of the parent to teach right and wrong to the child. And if you're going to teach right and wrong, you must teach from a position of authority. In a relationship between equals, I can say, hey, I think you're spending too much time on your phone. But you're free to say, go jump in a lake. I don't agree. You are mistaken. I have my own perspective, and I don't have to listen to you. Ayn Rand, many years ago, wrote that no unchosen obligation can be morally binding. And we can argue about whether that's a fair statement for adults. I think it's a very reasonable claim to make for relationships between adults. But the parent-child relationship is unchosen. The child didn't choose to have parents. And as a family doctor, so many times I've heard parents tell me that their kids said, I didn't choose to be born into this family. This child is invoking this cultural trope that no unchosen obligation can be morally binding. The child is saying, I didn't choose to be born in this family. You can't tell me what to do because I didn't choose this. And many parents are so stuck in this notion that no unchosen obligation can be binding that they give in. The kid says, I don't want to eat supper with you guys. I'm just going to take my plate in my bedroom. There's been an astonishing rise in the proportion of American kids who do not eat with their parents. This is now very common in this country for kids to eat in their own bedroom without their parents, and they think it's just fine. And the parents say, won't you come eat with us? Question mark. The kid says, no, I don't want to eat with you. And incidentally, this came very much to the fore during the early months of the pandemic. So let's go back 4 years. Spring of 2020, everything is locked down. The New York Times ran 2 articles saying, hey, don't worry about those limits on screen time anymore. Your kids are locked in their bedroom. Let them have all the time they want on screens. And there were some early news stories in mid-2020 about this explosion in anxiety and depression among teens. Well, Jean Twenge, certainly our nation's leading researcher of all things having to do with screens and teens, conducted a study in mid-2020 with kids all across the United States, surveyed these kids and asked them, surveyed who's more anxious and who's more depressed. And she found a bifurcation. Some kids were more anxious and depressed than before the pandemic, but other kids were less anxious and depressed before the pandemic. And she found one question in her survey that predicted infallibly which kids were doing better and which kids were doing worse. Ask that teenager this one question. As a result of the pandemic, have you become closer to your parents? Kids who answered that question, yes, were thriving. They were doing well. They were having a great time. They were less likely to be anxious and depressed than they were before the pandemic. The pandemic had been a boost for them because it turns out, she found, that many of these kids were overscheduled prior to the pandemic and not spending time with their family, but going from school to travel team soccer to computer coding class, all that got shut down. And now they're home with their parents and they're thriving. But other parents who followed the advice of the New York Times to let your kid just hang out in their bedroom on Instagram and TikTok, those kids were doing much worse. You need to prioritize the family. But you can only do that from a position of authority. It is the role of the parent, as I said a moment ago, to teach right and wrong, but you can only do that from a position of authority. I am not asking parents to trust the president or to trust the church or to trust the large corporation, but you must insist on your authority as a parent to lay down the law in your own home. If you don't, your kids will suffer. And that's the whole argument of the book in a nutshell. And I present the research in many different domains supporting that claim that kids need parents to exercise their authority. Not just little kids, but teenagers need parents to exercise authority. And if parents don't do that, you end up with kids who are anxious and depressed. Because the culture has become a culture of disrespect. And the first chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is titled The Culture of Disrespect. And this is not a guess and it's not nostalgia. We have good research on this topic. So researchers at UCLA looking at the most popular TV shows from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s find the most popular TV shows of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Shows like The Andy Griffith Show in 1967, or Happy Days in 1977, or Family Ties in 1987, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer in 1997, were shows that were all about teaching that being a good person means doing the right thing, means telling the truth even if it hurts, being a good friend even when it's not easy. Being famous, being wealthy were number 15 or number 16 out of 16 over those 30 years, 1967 and 1997. But then they found that between 1967 and 2007, American culture flipped upside down. And suddenly, being famous went from the least important thing to the most important thing.
Yep.
In 2007 shows like American Idol, iCarly, or Survivor, it's all about winning, doing the right thing. That's going to get you voted off the island. And the UCLA team wondered why. Why did American culture change so profoundly and fundamentally in 10 years' time? So the doing the right thing went from number 1 to number 13 out of 16. And the answer they give is social media. Social media transformed American culture. Suddenly it's all about likes and followers.
Yep.
And if American parents do not assert their authority, kids are not born knowing what's right and wrong. And if you don't teach them, they will look online. And what they will find there is Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Bruno Mars, Drake, a very toxic culture where it's cool to be disrespectful. You know, Drake, who is by many measures the most successful artist ever, he's had 79 songs reach the top 10 on the Billboard Top 100. Taylor Swift, I believe, has had about 50. His Drake's songs are filled with the F word, the N word, the A word. His signature greeting when he greets his fans at his concerts is the raised middle finger. He epitomizes the culture of disrespect, and he's enormously popular. And kids look to that culture like, oh, okay, so being disrespectful is cool. Right. You know, mother, you know, again, I'm a family doctor, and mom said to me, you know, my 8-year-old son has recently become so defiant, so disrespectful. I don't understand this. His father and I never behaved this way. And I said, does he watch Disney, Nickelodeon, Nick Jr.? She said, well, sure. I said, lock it down. I'm not saying all TV is bad. Home and garden television, usually okay. HGTV, but not Disney, not Nickelodeon. Lock those down, disable them. And 3 weeks later, mom called me. She said it stopped. He was learning that from the Disney Channel.
Yes,
the Disney Channel is now a major vector of the culture of disrespect. So unfortunately, it's not just Drake. It's the entire culture of the most popular YouTube videos, most popular TikTok videos, Disney, most of the most popular songs, not all, now are vectors of this culture of disrespect, teaching kids that it's cute and funny to be disrespectful to your parents. Well, that's really harmful. And again, that's a major point I make in the book. I don't just assert that. I provide lots of evidence in support of that claim that kids need structure. They need guidance. They need you, the parent, to teach them right and wrong. And if you fail, then your kids are adrift. And kids who are adrift are very susceptible to becoming anxious, depressed, and disengaged.
Thank you. That's remarkable, and it just makes me so sad where we are today. You have another, I mean, so many great books, but I have another one here, Girls on the Edge. You talk about how much girls are experiencing, like we were talking about, anxiety and depression more than boys. And this was interesting to me, since I would think that girls should be happier since, you know, than their grandmothers were at their age. We have so many more choices, so many more opportunities. So why are they so depressed? And what are the four main factors that the girls are struggling with today?
Wow. Okay. I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post years ago. This is literally like 15 years ago when Twilight was very popular. I read the Twilight books, which were really huge 15 years ago, and are still popular with girls today. And in the second Twilight book, Edward dumps his girlfriend, and she is so crushed. And the next chapter is October, and it's a blank page. And the next chapter is November, and it's a blank page. Without her boyfriend, she has no life. And this book was hugely popular. It was the #1 most popular book with American girls for years, these series of books. They were enormously popular. And the whole premise of the book is that her life consists in her relationship with her boyfriend. That's a really old-fashioned idea. And in my article for the Washington Post, I contrasted uh, the Twilight books with the Nancy Drew books. The Nancy Drew books were the most popular books of the
Yes.
1930s. And in the Nancy Drew books, yeah, she has a boyfriend. He is of no importance. He does nothing. She really doesn't need to have a boyfriend. She doesn't spend any time with him, and he doesn't help in any way solve the mystery. In one of the books, uh, I think it's called The Secret Staircase, her father is kidnapped, and the police cannot find him. And so she, on her own, sets out uh, uh, has the kidnappers arrested and rescues her father. And the boyfriend is mentioned, and he shows up for a scene or two. He's completely irrelevant. But here you have a young woman with agency and autonomy solving the story in the 1930s, which was an era of patriarchy, when most women were did not have professional careers. And as you pointed out today, women can do anything. They can be astronauts, they can be combat infantry, they can be surgeons, but they're miserable. And the rates of depression and anxiety among girls are many times higher than they were for their grandmothers. Why is that? So, again, there's a whole book I wrote addressing that, because it's more than one factor in play. Multiple different things have come into play. But I think part of it is that kids don't want to be grown-ups. Girls want to be women, and boys want to be men. But what does that mean? We used to teach them. We used to have a format, a framework, and kids could push against it, but there was a framework. The framework now is gone. And to the extent that there is a framework, it is toxic. So my daughter has expressed great interest in being combat uh, flying jets for the United States Navy.
Wow.
And people will say, "Oh, do you want to transition to the male role? What are your preferred pronouns?" Look, women can fly jets. One of the things I talk about in Girls on the Edge is a very strange detour on the road to equality. I'm old enough to remember Sally Ride, and I sometimes talk about Sally Ride feminism. Sally Ride, the first American woman to fly in space, the notion that women can do anything. And there was a whole series of decades from the 1970s through the 1990s where we celebrated the first woman to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company. That was Katharine Graham, Washington Post, early 1970s. First American woman to fly in space, Sally Ride. First American woman to be a brigadier general in the United States Army, who also commanded a platoon of paratroopers earlier in her career. She loved jumping out of planes with a parachute. First American woman to lead the National Institutes of Health. First woman to lead Harvard University, and so forth and so on. But in the last decade, that kind of went away, and transgender activism has now changed all that. And now anybody can be a woman. Well, if anybody can be a woman, then nobody's a woman, and being a woman is meaningless. That is the confusion that many girls now struggle with. If trans women are women, then what is a woman? When Ketanji Brown Jackson was a candidate to become a United States Supreme Court justice, she was famously asked, "What is a woman?" Well, the answer is an adult human female, but she couldn't bring herself to say that because the male-female binary is now unacceptable to the American left. I was doing professional development for school in Austin, Texas, and a teacher at my workshop told me how she's earning a master's in education at University of Texas, Austin. She told me how she went up to one of her professors in the School of Education, and she held out my book, Why Gender Matters. And she said to the professor, "I'd like to lend you my copy of Dr. Sax's book. I think you'd really find it interesting." And she told me the professor looked at the cover, why gender matters, what parents and teachers need to know about the emerging science of sex differences. And she told me the professor recoiled as if from an unclean thing. And the professor said, I have no interest in reading such sexist rubbish. The notion that there is an emerging science of male female difference, and the cover has male and female symbols on it, so it's clear that that's what we're talking about, is now offensive to many on the left. And there's no recognition that if you are unable to say what a woman is, Ketanji Brown Jackson said, well, I'm not a biologist. And the senators challenged her and said, do you have to be a biologist to say that a woman is an adult human female? And according to Ketanji Brown Jackson, you do. The result is kids who are confused. There's something deep and hardwired here. Girls want to be women. Boys want to be men. Every culture does construct that differently. And when I do that workshop, I sometimes contrast the Navajo with Orthodox Jews. And I talk specifically about the ceremony of Kinalda among the Navajo, where a Navajo girl spends years learning what Navajo women are expected to know from a community of women, mostly grandmothers. The arts and crafts of Navajo women that are taught by Navajo women to girls and only to girls, not to the boys. And then I contrast that with what a Jewish girl is taught. And I've got pictures of Jewish women teaching Jewish girls what a Jewish woman is expected to know. What that Jewish girl is learning is completely different from what the Navajo girl is learning. There's no overlap in the content, but the process is the same. In every enduring culture, you have a community of women for girls and a community of men for boys. And the women teach the girls, this is what it means to be a woman. We have lost that. And as a result, girls are looking to the internet, to popular songs. Number one hit video of 2020 was WAP. WAP stands for Wet Ass Pussy. That's the title of the song. Number one hit video on YouTube for 2020. So here you have Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, joined by Kylie Jenner, three of the most popular women in the United States in American popular culture. And they're singing, I want to choke, I want to gag on a man's penis. They don't use the word penis, they use a different word. And refer to themselves as bitches and whores. And that's the most popular video on YouTube. What is a girl supposed to think when she sees that some of the most popular women in the country are portraying themselves as bitches and whores who want to choke on a man's penis? Some girls are like, yuck, that's not me. That's not what I want. Maybe I'm not a girl. Maybe I'm a boy. Right. Perfectly reasonable response to a toxic culture. If you don't have a healthy culture in which girls have healthy models of women who they can admire and look up to, when you get rid of Sally Ride and you substitute Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, and Kylie Jenner, that's replacing a healthy culture with an unhealthy culture. And the result is girls who are confused, adrift, and wondering, do I even want to be a woman? If that's what it means to be a woman. If that, incidentally, WAP not only was number one on every chart, but it was praised, lauded by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, who said this is empowering women. Women finally have a voice, a number one hit video for women made by women. There were very few voices saying, is this really what we want our daughters to be looking at? For many years, subscribed to both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And sometimes you don't think you're living in the same country because the front page of those two are completely different. The stories they think are important are completely different, and they cover them completely differently. On most issues, they never agree. But here they did. They both thought WAP was just great. And that, again, I take as an indicator of how confused the culture is. That the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Teen Vogue, all praised this video as being the greatest thing that ever happened to girls, with no recognition of this is really harmful. And this is holding up a really unhealthy model of femininity. I want to gag, I want to choke on a man's
That's
penis.
just horrible.
So that is one of the four main factors that I describe. The disintegration in the cultural construction of femininity. What does it mean to be a woman? We must create. So speaking to you, parents, you must create a community of women for your daughter. You have to, it used to be there. We used to have many institutions. Again, Robert Putnam at Harvard has documented this better than anyone else. 50 years ago, he has shown you could go to any block in any city, town, or village in the United States, and you'd find a sewing circle. Organized, quoting Robert Putnam, not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity, which is a fancy way of saying that the women and girls in the sewing circle just happened to live on the same block.
Right.
And in that sewing circle, there were older women, younger women, and girls getting together to talk. And girls looking up to older women and getting guidance of what's important, what matters, what is dignity. Those are the sewing circles are long gone.
Yes.
And when I speak at churches, I encourage them to create them. That the teen youth group at many churches is a pizza party, and I show flyers from the youth group flyer for the church, where boys and girls are hanging out together, listening to Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. That's not what kids need. What a girl needs to become a woman of faith is different from what a boy needs to become a man of faith. And that's not a guess. I present that research at length in the final chapter of my book, Girls on the Edge. That girl needs a community of women of faith, and the church can provide that. But many churches don't. Most churches do not, in my firsthand observation. They want to be cool, they want to be relevant, so they throw a pizza party with pop music.
Right.
That is not the role of the church. Kids do that on their own if they want a pizza party with pop music. The church can do something different. It can create a community of women for girls. And I share examples of churches that are doing that, and some churches are. So that's one of the four factors: the disintegration in the cultural construct of femininity, the breaking of bonds across generations, the loss of community of women for girls. And it's fixable. Again, my books are fundamentally optimistic because there's nothing here that cannot be fixed. And it doesn't require an act of Congress. It doesn't require, you and I cannot change Hollywood. So how can we help our kids to fulfill their potential, to grow to be men and women of character in this toxic culture? That's what the book is fundamentally. That's what The Collapse of Parenting is fundamentally about.
Hi, everyone. So that's the end of the first half episode with Dr. Sax. Don't miss out on part 2 next week as we dive even deeper into this discussion. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today to Female Fluence. Together, we can influence and motivate other mind-like females. Your job is to feel alive, be in control, and always be true to your own self. Please don't forget to subscribe so you can continue feeling inspired. All the links and notes from this episode will be posted on my website, femalefluence.com. Don't forget to also follow me at Female Fluence on both Instagram and Facebook. Lastly, if you are in need of a woman empowerment life coach to help you identify the barriers that keep you from living the life you seek, please send an email to info@femalefluence.org. Remember, my friends, don't just exist, but live your life to the fullest. I'm your host, Pearl Mashur. Until we talk next time. Hi, everyone. So that's the end of the first half episode with Dr. Sax. Don't miss out on part 2 next week as we dive even deeper into this discussion. Thank you.